Great. So good morning from frigid Iowa. This is our first webinar for the year, and it'll be on crime lab proficiency testing and quality management. We're happy to report that we have a very large audience today. So thanks so much for joining us. The presenters will be two groups, the group from University of Virginia, Brett Gartner, Sharon Kelly, and Dan Murray, and then the collaborating group from the Houston Forensic Science Center, Maddie Newman, Kellen Handel, Rebecca Green, and Alicia Reardon. So the only thing I would like to say, next slide maybe, before we cede the mic to the presenters, is that there's an all-hands meeting coming up. Registration will open in March. The all-hands is going to be on May 11, 13 in the Iowa State campus. Today's video will be available on YouTube channel and also on CSAFE, our website, forensicstats.org. We will be sending everybody a link to the video. And we're going to start also requesting your short assessment. So we'll send a short evaluation in the next couple of days, and please, please, please send it back if you don't mind. That's going to be good information for us to improve future webinars. Certificates for today's webinar are available. Just contact Mark and he'll send them over. And if you have questions after the webinar, please type them into the chat. And remember to copy everyone, not just a single person, so that everybody gets to see the question. If you happen to have signed up using the audio in your computer, you might be able to ask a question orally, but if you can't, just use the chat. So without further ado, thanks again. And here goes the, sorry? Oh yeah, we're turning it over to Houston. That sounds funny. Bye.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Maddie Newman. I'm a quality research associate at the Houston Forensic Science.
Hold on, Maddie. We cannot see your slides, and hold on a second.
She'll need to share her screen.
You need to share your screen, and to share the screen, go down to the middle of your screen. There's going to be a green thing that says share. Can you see it?
Oh, okay. Thought I did this. Okay.
All right, let's see. Okay. Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone, thank you for bearing with me. My name is Maddie Newman. I'm a quality research associate at the Houston Forensic Science Center. Here with me today is Kellen Handel, quality specialist, Rebecca Green, the Latent Print technical lead, and Alicia Reardon, research and development analyst. I am going to give you a brief presentation about HFSC's blind quality control program. First, I'll just start with a brief history of the Houston Forensic Science Center, formerly the Houston Police Department Crime Lab. We are a local government corporation founded in 2014. The lab was created in part by then Mayor Anise Parker with the intent of being independent from law enforcement. We're overseen by a board of directors, the members of which who are appointed here include educational professionals, attorneys, and importantly, an exoneree. HFSC provides forensic services to the city of Houston and surrounding areas. There are 7 technical disciplines: toxicology, seized drugs, firearms, latent prints, forensic biology, multimedia, and crime scene, and all of the sections are accredited to the ISO IEC 17025 standard by ANAB. So briefly, why do we do blind quality control? Initially, the National Academy of Sciences called for blind proficiency testing in 2009 as a more precise test of a worker's accuracy. This report is what really got the ball rolling for the blind testing program at HFSC. Later, the PCAST report came out, again calling for blind proficiency testing. These two reports are major driving forces, encouraging laboratories to implement some form of blind testing. In addition to those, blind testing is also listed in the newest ISO standard as a way to ensure the validity of results for those labs that are accredited. And our program specifically helps us to fulfill requirements for options J and K of the 7.7.1 standard. So what are our blind quality controls? They are created and submitted by the quality division. They are mock cases that mimic real cases. You can see some examples of our blinds here in the photo. Varying sizes of manila envelopes. That's what the Houston Police Department uses, so that's what we use. The intent is for analysts to not realize that they are working a blind case, and the expected answer is known only by the quality division. Some of the benefits that we see from the program supplements accreditation required proficiency tests that are required at least annually, twice a year in biology, I believe. Proficiency tests aren't guaranteed to mimic casework, and the analysts know that they are completing a proficiency test. So the program also helps us to reduce the Hawthorne effect, which is the tendency for people to behave differently when they know they are being tested. The program goes beyond the occasional blind proficiency test to provide continuous quality improvement. The system allows us to look at our processes more than just once per year by testing the entire workflow. It also helps us to reassure our stakeholders that HFSC provides quality work, and the analysts can use information from the program to bolster their court testimony. Here I've included just a brief timeline of events starting in 2009 with that NAS report. You can see that the program was gradually implemented over time, starting with the toxicology section in 2015. As we got the hang of submitting blinds in the toxicology section, we gradually implemented the blind program in the other sections at HFSC. The most recent development to the program is beginning blind verifications in the Latent Print Comparison section. We started that in March 2019, and I'll touch a little bit more on that in a minute. Today, although we do implement the blind program in all sections except crime scene, we'll focus on the Latent Print Comparison section. All right, a brief overview of our process. HFSC personnel volunteer to be print donors. We ask 5 volunteers at a time. Record prints are created for those 5 volunteers and entered into the local APHIS with aliases, courtesy of the Harris County Sheriff's Office. Currently, sectional procedure is to search property and nonviolent crimes in the local APHIS only, so we stick to those crime types for our blind cases. The Houston Police Department is HFSC's main submitter, so we strive to mimic their casework. To create our evidence, donor prints are deposited onto a clean surface and lifted using black powder, and then deposited onto real HPD latent lift cards. HPD latent lift cards are the main form of evidence that the section receives, so that is what we use. You can see an example of some of our lifts there on the left. We work closely with the Houston Police Department to obtain access to their records management system, where we can generate unique real incident numbers for our blind cases. We also enter those cases into HPD's evidence management system so that they can follow the same workflow as real cases, which includes HFSC client services personnel transporting evidence to and from the HPD property room. By using HPD's systems and having client services transfer the evidence, no one from quality is ever on the chain of custody, which would be a really big giveaway that the case is a blind. Latent print comparison cases are auto-requested, so our client services team brings them back from the property room the same day that we submit them to the property room. Once back at the lab, cases are assigned at random by supervisors. Since we started doing blinds in this section, we have submitted about 232 blind cases as of this month. So what are we doing with this information that we're gaining from the program? We record a lot of different information, including but not limited to submission dates, expected results, reported results, assigned analysts, and the report date. The evaluation is dependent on multiple factors, which includes the limitations of the local APHIS as well as the latent print quality. If we submit low quality prints, we expect them to be reported as no latent value, no ridge detail, or not APHIS quality. However, if the prints that we submit were deemed by the analyst to be of APHIS quality, the analyst will search those through APHIS. If the APHIS search does not result in a hit, then the candidate list generated by the search is later reviewed. If the donor is not on the candidate list, then the result is deemed satisfactory because APHIS truly was negative. Conversely, if an APHIS search results in a hit, referred to by HFSC as a preliminary APHIS association, the analysis is deemed satisfactory if the association is reported to the correct alias. Cases that result in a preliminary association can be requested for full confirmation. Full confirmation cases are deemed satisfactory if an identification is reported to the correct alias. We can request about one full confirmation per alias, otherwise the analysts would recognize the alias names too soon, and then we would have to work with the Harris County Sheriff's Office to switch out those aliases more often. And I mentioned that blind verifications have recently been implemented in this section. The analysts do know when they are participating in a blind verification, but the initial examiner's results are hidden from the second examiner. This helps us to reduce any biasing information. These cases are assigned by the section technical lead, and they can be either, the verifications can be either on blind cases or real cases. Just a little bit about some of the major challenges that we've had to overcome. Maintaining an appropriate submission rate that doesn't overwhelm the section or take away from real casework took a little bit to figure out. Fortunately, that happens before we got to doing the blinds program in the latent print section. A rate was developed by our CEO to not burden the section, but still produce an ample sample size. So our goal is 5% of the section's casework output from the year before. So every year we take a look at how well the section did and adjust our monthly submissions based off of that 5%. Time and cost are often cited as two major hurdles to implementing a blind program like this. As far as time, the program is a part of our jobs in the quality division, so it's time that we have to set aside anyway as part of our job duties in order to make this program happen. Similarly to cost, because it is a part of our job description, there's no extra salary cost associated with it. And then in the latent print section specifically, the cost of materials is very minimal. We just need to purchase lift tape, black powder, brushes, manila envelopes. Mimicking casework has proven to be a challenge and continues to be a challenge. The analysts are used to seeing very specific submission forms and packaging from the Houston Police Department. So if we forget to mimic one tiny detail, the analysts will notice, and that will be a red flag for them that they're probably not working a real case. Our penmanship always gets us. If our handwriting is too neat, then we're told it's not mimicking an officer's handwriting. However, if it is too messy, it is still not mimicking an officer's handwriting. So we really need to find that balance there. Submitting realistic latent lifts is a challenge for us continually. You can see on the left there that we really do try to make our lifts look genuine. If the fingerprints are too neat or there's just one fingerprint, it can look a little suspicious to the analysts, so we do try to submit realistic latent lifts. If something doesn't work, we just have to try again. If a blind is discovered, we use that information to improve the next blind. So this program is very fluid. As case processes change, we need to be willing to reevaluate and change our processes as well. And most importantly, to the program, the stakeholders' participation and support of the program, as well as their understanding of how it benefits them as customers, is critical to the program's success. If we didn't have the support of HPD specifically, we would have a much harder time mimicking casework. We rely on their cooperation to generate case numbers and make sure that the chains of custody and evidence transfers look like any other case. Also important is the support and cooperation we have from the section management and the analysts. We value their input on what we can be doing to make the program the most beneficial for them. I've included here a table from a recent publication of ours that compares the cost of supplies for blind QC samples versus the cost of external PTs. And if you zoom in on latent prints there and just look at 2018, you can see we spent about $20 on supplies for the latent print section. This included things like black powder and lift tape. And to reiterate, we don't include salaries as part of this cost because the program is in our job descriptions. And then if you just look at the proficiency test cost for 2018 for latent prints, cost us just over $6,000. So some outcomes, future directions, and research. I mentioned that publication, implementation of a blind quality control program in a forensic laboratory. It has been published online to the Journal of Forensic Sciences. It is an open access article, so if you have not had a chance to read it, we would love for you to do so. The publication goes through each section in detail, as well as outlines recommendations for anyone interested in starting a blind quality control program. We have submitted a proposal to the Association of Firearms and Toolmarks Examiners to hold a workshop at their 2020 meeting that will be all about the blind program, how we did it, and obstacles we overcame. The focus will be a little more on the firearms section, but if you're interested, keep a lookout for that. We don't have any further details right now. Some of our goals include a better understanding of ground truth. We would like to have the prints evaluated by an experienced examiner before we submit them, so that we have a better idea of what to expect from analysis. We would like to continue to collaborate with researchers and other laboratories. Forming collaborations will not only benefit the local criminal justice system, but also provide increased confidence in forensic testing. As more laboratories adopt similar blind quality control or blind testing programs, an exchange program could be devised to share knowledge, data, and resources. This would help everyone to reduce cost and time associated with blind testing and provide more data for error rate determinations. We also hope to keep working with the latent print section to make the program the most beneficial for them. And for future research, as HFSC blind sample size increases, the goal is to incorporate error rate determinations. Additionally, future research involves developing methods to submit the same item to multiple analysts within a section. And that is all I have today. I've included our web address here if you haven't had a chance to check out our website. We suggest you do. We're a very transparent company and we provide a lot of information there. If you have further questions, you can email the quality division and we would be more than happy to answer those for you. And we just want to thank you for being here and thank you CSAFE for their collaboration. And thanks everyone who makes the blind program the success that it is.
So Mary, thank you so much. This is Alicia. There were a bunch of questions, I think, that, can you see them in the chat?
Lost my mouse.
Did you click on more? Click on more.
On the bottom right. So you need to go up. Oh, okay. On the bottom right, let me read them to you. Let me see. At the end of the presentations, hold on. First, what is the criteria used to determine APHIS quality?
I think Becky should answer. Right now, that's just dependent on the examiner. It's at their discretion. For a section.
Okay. The next one is, hello, is the ground truth for all blind cases individualization? So are these all positive cases?
So the ground truth that we have right now is only based on the donor who's providing the print. So we don't have any more specifics other than that. So if they're getting an APHIS hit, then we expect it to be to the donor, whichever alias name that is. That's what our ground truth is based on right now.
So the question, I think, let me rephrase the question. So the question is, do you ever have cases where the correct answer is no identification?
Yes, so, sorry, let me add, we also have submitted lists that are from people that are not in the APHIS system at the time, so we would expect the answer to be no APHIS hit.
Okay, perfect. The next question is, how many candidates are returned?
Our local system gives us 10 candidates at this time.
Okay, thank you. Next one, to piggyback, are there not suitable prints submitted as well? And are these cases vetted through a qualified examiner prior to submission?
We do submit low quality prints in order to hopefully mimic real casework. Currently, they are not being vetted by a professional latent print examiner at the time. That is something that we would like to be able to do in the future.
Okay. What about costs of removing examiners from casework and the overall turnaround time?
Yeah, that's why we target the 5%.
So I'm Alicia, I'm the research and development analyst, and my view is that the analysts agreed that they would maintain quality and proficient result, like proficiency while they're working here, and that is part of our take on proficiency. So we consider part of their job that they must maintain proficient results while they're working at HFSC, and to do that they must have satisfactory completion of blind cases. Right now, I think their goal is 5% of their casework, which would amount to one case about per month per analyst.
Okay, so you don't see this as a cost actually, which makes sense. What happens if an examiner does not think a latent is APHIS value? Is there a specific criteria used to grade latents?
Not currently, other than mine and Callan's untrained opinions.
Okay, to be continued. Do you see a difference in results between externally provided test providers and the internally created tests?
I don't think, I wouldn't say we see a difference. It's just we see from the blinds that they're mimicking casework more realistically. With the proficiency test, you know, they're basically provided a print and some maybe knowns or knowns that don't match or knowns that are IDs. So it's not necessarily a difference in the results. It's just based on what they're given for a proficiency and what they're given for a blind. That's the main difference between the two, is that blinds are more mimicking casework therefore we can better decipher their proficiency and their competency when they're completing those.
Okay. Next, if APHIS doesn't hit, is there a root cause analysis? A root cause analysis, I guess? Root cause analysis on why APHIS didn't return the candidate?
No, there's not. I mean, we don't really have too much control over APHIS.
Okay. How many personnel in your quality division?
Seven total.
Okay. How do you ensure that each examiner gets a test that is similar in difficulty level?
We can't ensure that at the time. We just try to submit things that are varying difficulty, and just throughout the program, we assume that everyone will have something that's on each the time that we have been doing this and continue.
So from my statistical point of view, if you do a random assignment, eventually everybody's going to get more or less the same difficulty cases. The last question, are audits performed of the quality management system outside of proficiency tests? If so, would you mind discussing a few of the audits? I think this one we'll leave for later offline because we still have to hear from the Virginia people, right? Or not? Are the Virginia people going to be talking?
Hello, Alicia. This is the Virginia people. No, we had really, we were just going to briefly introduce the Houston site and chime in, but we do not have a specific presentation here. We expected that this would run most of the time. So I'm impressed with how fast it went. I guess while I have the floor, I'll just briefly mention a few things.
Perfect.
One is just to jump back to one of these recent questions about our audits. I'm sorry, let me say it again. The question about how do you ensure each examiner gets a test that's similar in difficulty level. I think one way to conceptualize this good work is it's not so much about testing individual examiners the same way a proficiency test might. It's really kind of a test of the system. And that's in some ways what's been so striking and clever about this is it just works these tests or these check-ins into routine casework. So it's I don't know if it's so much like giving every examiner a test in the same way that we've usually thought of it. It's about a way of really examining the whole process. Does that distinction make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And Houston, I don't know, would you have anything to add to that, or did I get that wrong?
No, you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah.
Okay. So briefly, we had just wanted to say, I guess more by way of introduction, I think all of you out there are familiar with the HFSC to some degree, and you know that this has really been kind of a groundbreaking group here who has been really responsive to so many of the concerns about forensic sciences and even just the nature of their existence, right? They are independent. They are not based in a law enforcement entity. So that independent existence is the start. But even beyond that, they've done so much that's really groundbreaking in terms of responding to the concerns about forensic science, in terms of really improving the field. So we here at Virginia have had the honor of working with them really in just a small slice of what they do. We have been really impressed to see this work. When we've heard them talk about it other places, when we visit, one of the things we're always struck by is just the kind of pragmatics that they have had to work through to do this. So many of the questions they seem to get are how do you do this practically? And it's really been a treat to kind of go into the lab and see the very practical steps. They mentioned getting the right handwriting, getting the right materials, things that can really make this a true test and not an artificial test of the process. I guess with that, maybe we can shift back to them. I do see some more questions coming in, so maybe we can return to those.
So why don't you go ahead? I was reading the questions because I thought that was the only one that was looking at them. So why don't you go ahead and play the MC part?
Sure. Okay. So Houston, back to you. Here's the Q&A is resumed. When you say there are 7 people in the quality control division, are those full-time in quality control?
Yes, we are all full-time.
Okay. Would you, I mean, maybe more broadly, would you be comfortable to just kind of quickly talk about, we know each of you have somewhat different roles. Would you be open to talking a little bit about that just for illustration?
Sure. I mean, there are, well, we have a quality director and then
4 specialists.
4
specialists. And
sorry. 5 specialists, and then I am a quality research associate, and the specialists and the quality director are the people that really work with each of the separate sections on quality related things like non-conformances, root cause analysis, internal audits. We do have internal audits annually, not more. I don't know, anything more specific?
No, that's great. I mean, I'll add that you all have always had this kind of well-developed QC division. Maddie, who the listeners heard from for most of this presentation, is actually sort of a unique position funded by CSAFE, so sort of this research field collaboration position. And so Maddie has been, involved and embedded, I guess, in the QC division there, but also helping facilitate the research in collaboration with CSAFE. The next question is, what happens if an analyst doesn't pass the proficiency test? If the goal is about the system, have you found any system processes that have been improved after implementing blind proficiency tests?
So I can speak to the second one. You guys want to speak to the first one?
Sorry, can you repeat the first one?
Not passing a proficiency test.
If the same way that if a external proficiency test is not passed on the analyst, it's the same for a blind. If the expected answer is not reached, of course, including all of the nuances that go along with the latents, we would do a root cause analysis to figure out why the expected answer was not reached. And, we would determine if it was the process, if it was the analyst, if it was the method they used. So we would handle it in the same way that an external proficiency test was not, did not reach consensus results. And then the second part.
We have had a few system processes. I don't think we've had any in latent print specifically. We did have one in the multimedia section that helped us to describe a particular procedure more thoroughly in the SOP, so that I guess it wasn't a mistake, but just so they can improve their processes going forward. So I think that's the only one I can think of.
Okay, thank you. This the next question sounds somewhat similar. What steps are taken if the expected results are not obtained? Is that viewed as a system failure? How do you respond to those? So similar question, I think.
Yeah, I would say root cause analysis as well, and depending on the findings of the root cause analysis. So it might be a system failure. It might be the SOP wasn't followed. It could be a number of things depending on what we find during the root cause analysis.
Okay, thanks. The next question, if the blind test is used to test the system, is the blind test conclusion verified?
And maybe this is Sharon from UVA. This may also be a nice time to just explain maybe some of the case processing differences, your PAA system that may be different from the kind of case processing, well, now I'm redundant, case processing process that other labs use. So maybe that's helpful context in responding to that question about verifications.
Right right now, our current workflow is, for most cases, unless there's a specific comparison request, is to do an analysis of all the latent prints and run those through an APHIS, at least a local system, if not state and federal systems. And from that point, we report out the name of any potential hits as investigative leads for the officers or DAs to request actual confirmation of the latent print to be fully compared to any individual, fully compared to all of the latents. We also get all of our sufficiency determinations verified, so that would come after the APHIS result, but they do not check the APHIS comparisons as part of that verification. They are just saying if all of this, they agree with all the suitability determinations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. The next question is how many RCAs or root cause analyses have been conducted in the latent unit as a result of a proficiency test?
I want to say 0, but we did have an instance where we were looking more into the candidate lists during APHIS searches, and we did have 2 cases where the analyst reported no hit, but the candidate was actually on the candidate list, or the donor was actually on the candidate list. So we had to document that, and at this time we don't have enough I guess sample size to determine what that really means. So that's just something we're keeping an eye on going forward, and something that we're aware of. So I don't know if I would necessarily call that a root cause analysis, but we did have to do a little investigation into that. So that's happened 1 time in latent so far.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Next question is, you said you wanted to mimic casework. What types of impressions are in these blind cases? The ones you produce, I assume they mean. Do they include fingers, palms, joints, tips, and unknown impressions?
We do
All of the above.
Yeah, all of the above. Impressions from the hands. So I don't think we've ever done any sort of foot impression. The limitation is that the 10 prints that we create for the aliases don't have palm prints at all. So if we submit a palm, then we would not expect those to return a hit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
And can you all talk about just the process that we've heard some about maybe, but just kind of the types of objects where you find them, you know, like kind of what the impressions are going on and how you make that as realistic as possible?
Yes, that would be for latent print processing, right?
Do you mean when we're lifting them to put them on the cards?
Yeah.
So we use a lot of, the only thing we use are non-porous surfaces. We use a lot of flat surfaces to make it easier on ourselves, but we also try to do different things like cups and cans and just random shaped things to make them look more realistic. So we're trying to mimic the lifts in that way as well, different shapes that the surface is lifting off of.
Yeah, thank you. The next question here is, what if the examiner had made an error that was reported out as preliminary results? And you may have kind of touched on this already.
Yeah, root cause analysis as well on that one, to try to determine what happened.
Maybe if it was part of the blind, but typically our SOPs cover that, and our reporting covers out that is not deemed as an identification, and that when upon full confirmation, it can be either an exclusion, inconclusive, or identification.
Yeah, so the important thing there is the reporting language, where they're not saying it's identified, they're just providing it as an investigative lead with a name. They're not saying it's Alicia Reardon's right middle finger. They just say, Alicia Reardon, for confirmation results, please submit a request. This by no means constitutes an identification. Right. So your report should say, you know, if you request confirmation, it should say identification, inconclusive, exclusion. So the preliminary report language in no way is saying for sure, I think Alicia Reardon's the one that deposited this print.
Yes, it's very clear.
Right.
Nobody's read that. But
Okay. Yeah, I think, you know, I think the comments you just gave are really responsive to one of the next questions that came in. This question says, I'm concerned that there seems to be no validation or consensus results of a qualified examiner prior to these being submitted. What is done when there's a conflict resolution process with one of these cases? In other words, if a test wasn't validated by a qualified expert, how do you referee this? And feel free to say a bit more there, although I think some of that was captured in your prior comments.
This is Alicia again. I like conflict, so I'm going to answer. Their conflict resolution policies would determine what is reported. So once it's submitted to the section, that's when the qualified examiner obviously would want a qualified examiner beforehand to determine, you know, quality, to make the results a little bit more applicable to what potentially could develop out of the section. But as you know, no two examiners constantly agree on what sufficiency is. No two examiners constantly agree on what, you know, identification, exclusion, and inclusive is. So even at that point, you could say still the same limitation there, that it's subjective in nature and that it could always arise in conflict resolution. But the policy is that if, say, Rebecca and I don't agree on sufficiency, we would discuss it. If we still don't agree, challenge me if I'm wrong, I don't know, it's been a while since I've been in the section, that it would go to either the technical lead or the supervisor to distribute that print to the section or to make a determination of their opinion. So either 2 against 1 or a selection from the group against the decision. So if it's the consensus, report a decision then at that point.
We've updated it to where it's a group that reviews it as opposed to the whole section, so that it's kind of equal all the time. But basically that workflow.
Okay. Thank you, Alicia. And I'll add for the listeners that Alicia has also written and published on this. She's lead author on a paper that describes the conflict resolution process there in more detail. So if anybody wants to dig into that, that's certainly worth reading. We also have a few questions that kind of harken back to one of the earlier ones about how you actually get the samples for the blinds. One is, are these prints usually taken from clean surfaces for real cases? And the other is, do you submit latents from porous surfaces as part of testing? If not, why not?
Yes, from clean, so we can ensure the ones that we're lifting are the ones that we want. I don't think off the top of my head we've lifted from any porous surfaces, but that is definitely something for us to keep in mind.
Well, I think the reason for that would probably be the latent print comparison section. Primarily what we get is lift cards, and you don't typically get lifts from porous surfaces. They do also submit blind cases to our processing unit, and they would submit us photos of theirs. So I'd have to assume you've done porous items to the processing unit, so we would be getting them that way.
The porous is kind of hard for us to ensure that the prints that we're putting on there are the only ones that we're going to be getting back. Yeah, because you can't clean that surface. So those are kind of
You can't lift from those.
Sure. Okay. And then just a quick question about how many examiners are in the latent unit?
Well, we have 18 that can work. 4 of those are currently in training, and we're in management. But so that do some, or 5 in management, so that's 19 with our manager that can do some form of casework.
Perfect. And are any of these blind tests entered as a comparison case, or are they all for APHIS searching only?
The majority of them are for APHIS searching only, just so that we can keep our aliases in the local APHIS longer, but then eventually we will request at least one confirmation per alias.
And that this isn't a question that's been submitted, and so I'm not sure if this is interesting to other labs or practitioners, but could you all talk maybe just briefly about that relationship with Harris County and HPD, and whether that was challenging to be able to submit aliases into that local APHIS, because the system seems to kind of hinge on that.
It does. I think that was before me.
But I believe it started with when we determined that was kind of the only way that we would get blinds to work, is that we would need, donor alias prints in the APHIS system. The manager of the latent print section here went and had a conversation with the APHIS team over at the county, and the county allowed us to put our 5 alias tin print cards into their APHIS system. So I don't recall any issue with that. I think it was just a good working relationship. And then same with HPD, is our CEO has a really good working relationship with the chiefs of HPD. So when we have a roadblock to overcome, they're really good about helping us figure out how we can go around it. So it's really important for the HPD and the Harris County working relationships that we have with them over there. So that's how it works.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Related to that, I guess I should mention that our aliases last approximately 6 months before the analysts start recognizing the names and we need to switch them out.
Perfect. Where are we? Could the examiners in the unit work with the quality division to set specific minimum criteria that all would be tested against?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a going forward kind of thing. I mean, right now we're really strapped at capacity with our latent print unit, so we're trying not to burden them even more. But yeah, that's definitely something that we would like to do in the future.
The next question here is, since ground truth is known, is inconclusive an acceptable response? Any stats on how often the result is reported as inconclusive?
I think inconclusive would be one of the responses on those comparison cases. When they do submit those, it would be appropriate. I don't know how often that has happened. I'm sure you track all of the conclusions, right? So
for all the comparisons that we've submitted so far, which are 10 out of all that we submitted, 1 for each alias that we've had in the system so far, they've all resulted in IDs. So we haven't had any inconclusive results for the comparisons yet.
And the section overall does not result, like their conclusions are rarely inconclusive. It's like 60% is identification, 30-ish is exclusion, and then the rest is inconclusive. So
I would say though, in the last 6 months, we established more exclusion criteria, so that is starting to shift. Those numbers are probably from before that.
yes, they are.
Yeah.
And this is Brett Gardner from University of Virginia as well. Maybe now would be a good time to just clarify. So it sounds like you guys know that ground truth, as in what individual the print comes from. You don't know whether it is, of sufficient quality for examination. So although so-and-so touched that object, is it fair to say that inconclusive could be appropriate in some situations because it's just so smeared or distorted?
Currently, though, inconclusive is a comparison decision for our section. We would just say it was not of value for comparison.
Yeah.
In those instances.
Yeah.
Go next.
Yeah, so I see the next question is, have any of the processors or examiners been able to realize that they're working on a blind test? And if so, how do they usually figure it out?
Oh, yes. The processors, we have 2 processors, and I swear one of them prides himself on discovering our blinds. If you're listening. No, and a lot of the processing being discoveries happen because maybe, you know, we submitted a tool and we didn't, I don't know. Like our famous one is a crowbar. We submitted a crowbar, but we didn't touch it like a crowbar. As far as the examiners, a lot of it is maybe just like one tiny detail looks suspicious in either our limbs or the packaging, and then the analyst is just hyper aware and starts to notice more and more discrepancies. I think we've had not very many for the latent print comparison section discovered. I don't, like 3? Is that too low? Not very many.
Yeah, definitely more in the processing, because they'll say that, oh, that, you know, that print was way too clean. They would have never handled it that way. So we've tried to get better at mimicking casework, really, because handling the item that we're submitting in a normal way and making sure our prints are not too nice. They're a little bit messy, or, you know, so it's a fine line for sure.
Do you have any estimate on how successful you've been in successfully getting these blinds in? Like, just a vague estimate of how many end up being spotted?
Not just specific to latents. I think we put that in our paper. I think it was about 5% of total submitted had been discovered as blinds.
Okay.
And you all have the clever incentive system. Is that still in place? And can you tell people about that, to kind of detect blinds and give feedback on how realistic they are?
Yeah, an incentive was put in place by our CEO in the beginning to encourage us, if a blind was discovered, to submit better blinds. It defeats the purpose if the analysts know that they're getting a blind and they keep working it and they don't tell us. But I believe the agreement was if they correctly discover a blind, then our CEO gives a Starbucks gift card. If they incorrectly discover a blind, then they owe the CEO $1.
Although that's been somewhat problematic, as I mean, I would never normally check if an address is correct, but now some people think it's a game, and Google Earth is their friend. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember those funny stories about like addresses not checking out or addresses not matching a crime type or something like that.
my favorite is the familiarity of the smell of a gun, which the analyst never actually handled. So
Yeah.
that was quite hilarious.
And again, just a quick reminder for listeners, and Maddie, I think you mentioned this earlier, but their team has published a nice paper just describing the blind QC process. This was published real recently in Journal of Forensic Sciences. It's a 2019 paper. Very much worth checking out, just to get more detail on this process and to kind of get it in a more, maybe more linear way than we're getting at through the questions here.
Yeah, and again, it's open access, so please do go check it out.
And this last question that we have kind of touches on the workflow you were talking about earlier. But the question is, if you know ground truth, why are you not currently using comparison cases in the blind proficiency program?
I think that one of the reasons is, for whatever reasons, we don't get very many comparison cases submitted here. Most of them come through us releasing an investigative lead and then them requesting a comparison. So it's partly in mimicking our current workflows.
Yeah, the base rates of those are just much lower, it sounds like.
Right.
Yeah.
And then would you mind talking, I know that this has been an issue with some other laboratories, just any advice or problems that you conquered in figuring out how to use limbs to your advantage in this, how to flag cases discreetly? Talk a bit about that.
It's Alicia again. I'm the LIMS administrator here. Part of it is the system that we use. We're able to have fields that are permissions based. So there is a field in there, and I don't know if you guys use it or not, but they can mark the case as a blind proficiency case or request. I can't remember where I put it at this point. But it's a checkbox, but the only people that have permission to that checkbox are quality staff. So, and myself as the LIMS admin. So no other person would have access to whether or not that is on the back end, except for LIMS admin and quality staff. So if they need to know all of the cases that they've submitted from LIMS, then we can pull that data. They also keep their own spreadsheet just in case something is missed or there's a glitch or something. But they collect a lot of data in the background as well.
So a couple more questions just rolled in. The first is, has this process been presented to community stakeholders?
Yes, I would say we, our executive management presents to our board of directors on a monthly basis, and we include information about our blind program there, and those can be live streamed, and as well as, I guess, just other presentations and just open communication with HPD mostly, because they know exactly, they know about the program, they know what's going on, and they know how we're implementing it, so they're aware of the program as well.
It's in our newsletters too, right?
Yeah, we do have an external newsletter. If there's any changes to the program or anything we want to share, we can put it in there too, as a way to reach our stakeholders.
And how has this affected the agency's backlog is the next question.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we stick to the 5% so we don't overburden them. And I mentioned that 5% is 5%, but we reevaluate that yearly. And I can say that for 2019 versus 2020, our blind PC submission has gone down to give the latent print section time to just focus on their real casework.
Also, you can check out our awesome website. The trend data shows that for majority of the sections, they have implemented efficiency procedures, and their turnaround time has actually reduced significantly since we've started. So that in turn would reduce the backlog. Of course, that depends on how many requests we get in as well. So if toxicology, for example, their requests have increased significantly since 2016, so their backlog has gone up. But I mean, other sections have reduced their backlog to practically zero. So it's kind of a give and take there.
The next question is, thanks for telling us about the paper. Is the data available publicly, perchance?
I mean, in the paper we do discuss numbers.
The paper is available online, but not all of the data, and we try to keep as much data as we can close to the vest, so we can keep it blind as possible.
Yeah, the paper does go over a lot, and then if you happen to read the paper and you still have questions about any of the data, definitely just email that quality email there, and we would love to answer any further questions.
Thank you all, and I think we're we're now at about time to wrap up. Would Alicia or someone at Iowa want to wrap up?
Sure. This was a pretty lively Q&A session, so this is great. If anybody has any more questions, I'm sure the folks at UVA or at the Houston Forensic Science Center will be happy to answer them. And if you want to look at the webinar again and listen to all the questions and the answers, again, those will be available in a couple of days. And go to our website, www.forensicstats.org, to get a link to the webinar. As always, please feel free to contact us. We're happy to talk to anybody. If you have some brilliant idea about a webinar you would like to present, and you here means anybody, let us know, and we'll be happy to talk with you. So until next one, which is in about a month, I guess. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.